I mean, it's really dramatic stuff.
Right in the basement, you felt it. Walls were caving in, everything that was going on. I mean, I know of people that got killed in the basement. I know of people that got broken legs in the basement. People that got reconstructive surgery because the walls hit them in the face.
And we have some workers who were there that were damaged by these sub-basement explosions, and talk about a 50-ton hydraulic press, for example, that was completely obliterated in the explosion. And if you look at the film footage of the explosions, you find all over the place there's these little plumes of smoke breaking out called spools that are symptomatic of a controlled demolition. Here's a spool, see how it extends. Here's another, see how it extends. Here's another, see how it extends. And we wound up with this mass of steel that was surprisingly easy to remove because so much of it was of a relatively uniform size, around 30-foot lengths, really quite remarkable. And they started cleaning up the site almost immediately. Now, the claim was made, and you can find this in the 9/11 Commission report, that the center of the buildings was all hollowed out. But the only part of the center of the buildings was all hollowed out were the actual elevator shafts. There were, in fact, 47 steel columns at the center of each of these buildings. 47 steel columns at the center of these buildings, and on the perimeter there were no less than 240 steel columns. And you certainly would have expected them to be projecting upward. If the building had fallen, it would have been very asymmetrical. It would have been very different kind of collapse than occurred here. Here's some early photographs from the construction of these buildings. They were really marvels of engineering. These were brilliantly conceived buildings, and they were built in the full knowledge that it might be the case that they have to resist the impact of aircraft. Here is Frank DiMartini, who was the chief engineer on one of the towers, who reported that they were constructed in such a fashion and they were so resilient that the impact of the largest known commercial aircraft at the time, a Boeing 707, would be like sticking a pencil through mosquito netting.
The building was designed to have a fully loaded 707 crash into it. That was the largest plane at the time. I believe that the building probably could sustain multiple impacts of jetliners because this structure is like the mosquito netting on your screen door, this intense grid, and the jet plane is just a pencil puncturing that screen netting. It really does nothing to the screen netting.
And I found 3 other engineers who played primary roles in the project who say the same thing. This guy, Frank DiMartini, was killed on 9/11 when the buildings collapsed. Here's a comparison of the Boeing 707 with the 767. They're very similar in their dimensions, in their maximum takeoff weight, maximum fuel capacity, cruise speeds, and the like. These are very similar aircraft. Let me mention, by the way, that this is the first and only time in history that any steel structure skyscrapers are ever collapsed due to fire. It has never before been recorded in the history of structural engineering, before or since. So government is asking us to believe that on this one day, 9/11, as it were, the laws of physics were suspended and phenomena never before known to structural engineering were taking place just in this exact location. Here is World Trade Center building number 7. This was a 47-story skyscraper, which if it hadn't been surrounded by 110-story buildings would have been regarded as quite a substantial building. This building fell at 5:25 p.m., never having been hit by any aircraft and only having sustained 2 relatively small fires. And it was brought down by what we know was a controlled demolition, because Larry Silverstein, who had leased the World Trade Center about 6 months before all these events took place and insured the buildings at quite a substantial chunk of money in the billions of dollars, for which he then collected twice by insisting it was 2 different attacks, had a conversation with somebody he described as the chief of police, where Silverstein reported he told the chief, well, there's been so much death and destruction, maybe the best thing we can do is pull it.
I remember getting a call from the fire department commander telling me that they were not sure they were going to be able to contain the fire. And I said, you know, we've had such terrible loss of life. Maybe the smartest thing to do is pull it. And they made that decision to pull, and then we watched the building collapse.
where the term pulling, of course, in construction means take it down by controlled demolition. This building came down perfectly symmetrical, fell into its own footprint. Absolutely crystal clear that that is what happened to World Trade Center 7. The best that the 9/11 Commission could do was to say that the only scenario they had for its collapse was highly improbable. What that means is they couldn't explain it. What that means is if they did explain it, it would raise too many important questions about whether the other buildings whose collapse was so very similar to the collapse of World Trade Center number 7 hadn't been from similar causes. In this case, notice, in order to pull the building, there had to be pre-positioned explosives. The building could not have been pulled unless there were pre-positioned explosives, which raises the very appropriate question, does that mean there could have been pre-positioned explosives in the World Trade Center? Well, there have been a lot of reports of oddities involving security in the weeks leading up to 9/11. The agency that responsible for its security is a company named Securicom. A director of the agency, which not only was responsible for security at the World Trade Center, but also at Dulles Airport and for United Airlines, was none other than Marvin Bush, the president's brother.
He's joining us now, the co-chairman of Scholars for 9/11 Truth, Professor Emeritus at the University of Minnesota at Duluth, James Fetzer. Professor, thank you so much for being here with us. First of all, is this a required course? Can you hear me?
Yeah, go ahead.
Is it a required course?
Well, you got your facts foxed, I'm sorry to say. In fact, I created an organization of faculty and experts to study 9/11, not to teach in courses.
Right.
But I must tell you what we have discovered.
Well, I just want to be clear because
certainly qualify as material for an important course.
So you're saying you're not teaching this?
Teaching.
I want to be clear here. You're not teaching a course in this.
No, you're confused, and I hope that Fox usually does a better job on their research than this.
All right, so there
I created an organization of faculty and scholars to study 9/11.
All right, I want to be clear on this.
We've discovered that practically everything the government has told us about it is false.
Yeah, I want to get into that in a moment. I just want to be clear. So as far as you know, there is no course on 9/11 conspiracy theories being taught at your university or any place else that you know of?
That's right, but it's a great idea. I would certainly support having such a course because there's a lot of material to work with.
All right, and what evidence do you have that the government was involved, that Cheney knew, that anybody in the chain of command knew ahead of time that this was going to happen on 9/11? Can you give us any piece of evidence that would substantiate that argument?
Absolutely. For example, Norman Mineta testified to the 9/11 Commission that he observed Dick Cheney in an underground bunker when a young aide came up to him and repeatedly told him, "Sir, it's 50 miles out. Sir, it's 30 miles. Sir, it's 10 miles out. Sir, do the orders still stand?" Cheney turned around, jumped on him, nearly bit off his head and said, "Of course the orders still stand. Have you heard anything different?" The order had to be to not shoot down the plane that was approaching the Pentagon. After all, the order should have been to shoot it down. Shooting it down would be the obvious thing to do when you consider that you're going to lose the passengers in the plane if you shoot it down, but if you don't, you're going to use the passengers in the plane and also, of course, all the personnel and property at the target.
Hey, Prof, let me ask you, how big is this group of professors that you've put together, this organization you've formed, that gives credence, if you will, to the theory you just advanced about 9/11?
Well, there are over 300 members, Colonel North, including about 200 with advanced research skills, and about 85 that have affiliations, including physicists, mechanical engineers, pilots, aeronautical engineers.
Sure.
We've discovered that the Twin Towers were brought down by controlled demolition. We've discovered that the Osama bin Laden appears to have had nothing to do with
Prof, help me out here. Having been involved in a couple of controversial undertakings over my years in government service, how many people in the government were part of this conspiracy that you envision? Hundreds, thousands?
No, Ollie. I think it's a small number. You know about classified, controlled operations where everything's
Sure.
compartmentalized.
Yeah.
Do you know, Ollie, that the FBI is